You're watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We now turn to our Reporters Roundtable to dig into some of the specifics in these results from this poll. And today, we've brought you the best. We have Brenden Moore, political reporter for Lee Enterprises, and Dave Dahl, political reporter for WTAX. Here
I think you're the best, Cole. You're the bestest.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Always happy to be on, Cole.
Brenden, I'll start with you. 15-point lead for Governor Pritzker. Winning in Chicago, dominating in Chicago, winning in the suburbs. Bailey's got that downstate lead. The front page of this poll, not too surprising.
No, I think the race is pretty much where we thought it would be at this point, given the partisan lean of the state, and quite frankly, the fact that Darren Bailey hasn't been on television since late June. Governor Pritzker has had free reign to kind of define his opponent, and he's done so by painting him in ads as extreme on some things and perhaps out of step with most Illinois voters. And I think you've seen that play out in some of these numbers. So obviously the top line was a 15-point lead for Governor Pritzker, but if you dive into the numbers a little bit, there's a significant gender gap in there. The governor's leading with men too by a couple of points, which is pretty impressive, but even more impressive is that he is winning 55% to 30% with female voters, which is just an insane gap. And if you look at some of his advertisements, he's really been playing up the issue of abortion. Obviously, Senator Bailey's anti-abortion. Illinois, most voters, according to most polls, are pro-choice, and the governor has run ads to that effect. And it appears that's making some inroads, at least in the suburbs, particularly with female voters. And it's not necessarily that the governor is super popular. It's just that Senator Bailey is not resonating with voters, particularly women. I mean, 30% is very low.
Not only that, but there's no middle ground. There's nobody on the fence. There's nobody in some, gosh, let me get out a coin so I can flip it between JB and Bailey. I mean, it's strictly a get out the vote matter. And all the Bailey's people are going to show up, and will all of JB's? I don't know. As you say, it's not necessarily that he's so popular, but it's that, look, if you like Donald Trump, you'll like Darren Bailey. And, I ought to be charging money for that slogan. But I think that's what it comes down to, and Donald Trump was highly unpopular in Illinois.
Yeah, and Bailey's campaign outright rejected the result of this poll yesterday. Not surprising, considering the overall results. Brenden, you mentioned the really low numbers for Bailey when it comes to women, but we saw Pritzker have the lead in that coveted suburban part of the state. It's how he beat Rauner, and Dave, we just left an event with former Governor Jim Edgar, who talked about how the dynamics of the state have changed, and now the suburbs is the real purple area in the state. For Pritzker to have control of that right now, that does seem to bode pretty well.
He said talking about Edgar, over the course of the last several years, the Republicans have moved right and the state has moved left. And another thing that he didn't necessarily comment on, if Edgar ran as a Republican today, he'd lose badly. It's so polarized. I mean, to be a Republican, to be a real Republican, you've got to be all Second Amendment, no abortion, no exceptions, no how. You've got to show your ID to vote. All these things, and unless you're right in line, and again, as the former Governor Edgar said, with the primary, you got to be at the very end of the spectrum, and in the general, maybe you're a little more moderate. Well, being moderate is not Darren Bailey's brand.
And to add on to that, Dave, I mean, just look at the top issues for voters in this poll. I mean, number one was the economy. Number two was threats to democracy. Number three was abortion. Number four, crime. And if you look at some of the advertising that Republicans and conservatives have done, they've really focused on that crime issue, and it has polled well in conservative areas and downstate. It's polled a little bit better, but hasn't polled as well in the suburbs. Clearly, voters there are concerned about inflation. They're concerned about abortion rights, and obviously they're concerned about democracy. And clearly, as you said, Dave, if you like Donald Trump, you're going to like Darren Bailey. Well, quite frankly, there's not a lot of voters in the suburbs that like Donald Trump, at least according to the past couple of presidential election results. So it's not really a surprise that he's not resonating with those voters, given the issues that that his campaign and Republicans have emphasized, which maybe not be as popular with some of those suburban voters as maybe they thought a few months ago.
Brenden, you mentioned that 10% of the fourth most important issue to voters was crime at 10% of those polled. The other really key figure in that statistic in particular, only 58% of that 10% said they would vote for Bailey. So while Pritzker is holding high 80s and even 90% leads on the threats to democracy and abortion pollers, crime, Bailey is not holding this massive lead in, and that's causing even more problems and it's not really giving him much ground to make up in the overall scheme of things. Dave, we've been hearing about crime nonstop. We've been hearing about the Safety Act nonstop from Republicans. Are you surprised to see this number kind of that being so low and the overall attitude and approach people want to see to the rise in crime seemingly being, starkly different as well?
We hear a lot about crime in the Chicago area, and when I visit Chicago, at the risk of sounding like some uneducated rube, which I guess is redundant, I think if I know where I'm going and what I'm doing and walk with a purpose, I'm probably going to be left alone. I think that you're probably not going to have a lot of random crime on tourists in Chicago, and I think most of the state probably, as your results show, doesn't worry about crime in their own community. They're worried about the pocketbook, et cetera, et cetera. I think January 6th is still in the news, and as you have observed, we as reporters have or need to get every Republican on the record. Who's the president? Was the election free and fair? Because there are still people who believe that Biden stole the election, or they didn't count all the votes, they only counted enough for Biden to win, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when you think about Donald Trump, and I forget who said this last, I'm not sure if we heard this as on the day we're taping or not. Trump got people involved who normally don't get involved. I would guess that a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump in the US maybe were voting in an election for the first time. And as someone said, Trump says the quiet part out loud. People are awakened to it and say, I like the things he says. And now it's okay for me to say, you XXXXX. Fill in your own thing here that you didn't used to say. But now we say it. And when Trump survived that Access Hollywood tape, where you'd think he would have crashed and burned and just left a burnt hole in the ground, he survived it, and he did, it didn't make him any less popular. And so I think that's where the world changed.
I want to get into just a couple of the more policy-based questions we had in this poll as well. Two pretty big ones that would be facing a Pritzker administration if he were to get another term. The first one being slightly over 50% of people in the state saying that they would support state funding going to help people seeking abortions from out of state, and slightly under 50% supporting a statewide assault rifle ban. Now, Pritzker, on the first issue, let's start with the abortion issue. Pritzker has shied away from that policy as he's promised more changes to come in future Illinois sessions. He's stayed away from that, saying he would much rather see the federal government make those, help with people seeking that care. But to see this kind of reaction from the state, it doesn't seem like quite as bad of a political move as maybe some would have thought a couple of months ago.
Right. I think that the politics on abortion have shifted dramatically in recent years, and especially in the past few months since the Roe decision came down. And you're seeing a lot of Democratic governors and leaders in states around the country try to, make this an issue, or at least show that they support women, whether it's in their state or in surrounding states. So I think that while Governor Pritzker may be right now not, in the middle of an election campaign, is not going to emphasize that, we could see that perhaps next session if he's reelected, especially if there is this speculation about him running for president. He's made abortion rights a signature part of his appeal of his campaign so far this cycle, and so I think that, especially depending on the results of the election, if we do see a robust turnout from women voters, especially in the suburbs, that it might increase the level of the appetite for it in the legislature, and maybe convince the governor to take action on that, because if you look at, say, what the governor of New York is doing, or the governor of California, they're all setting aside more funds for women, whether in state or out of state, and I think that especially Illinois being in the position it's in the middle of the country, where literally surrounded by states that have anti-abortion laws on the books, there'll be a lot of pressure, especially from advocates, for the governor to do something.
Dave, the concept of an assault weapon ban in Illinois is not a new one. We mentioned Jim Edgar earlier. He debated that back in the 90s, but it still hasn't happened. Earlier on this very show, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton reiterated their administration's commitment to getting that done in the next session. But there's a lot of hurdles before you can make that big of a step when we're talking about something involving the Second Amendment. What are your thoughts on if this can actually get done? And
when you're talking about guns, you're not talking about a Democratic Republican issue. You're talking about a Chicago and downstate issue, and even the Democrats who are downstate are in favor of the Second Amendment, and that's one reason why Jerry Costello's not in the legislature anymore, because the governor couldn't count on Costello's vote. So they, as Rauner did with a number of folks, kicked him upstairs. And Costello's now director of agriculture. And my gut tells me a lot of things, but my gut tells me that the issue you're talking about now is probably, on this date, a stalemate. I don't see either side moving. I don't see them getting enough, votes to move that ball any further than it's moved.
And just to add on that very quickly, Cole, the governor said there would be a call for a special session in July that would be in the coming months. We thought maybe August, maybe September. Obviously, it hasn't happened yet. It's probably not going to happen. They're coming back for veto session in a month.
It's October now.
It's October, yeah, pretty much. It's October now. I mean,
going back in a few weeks.
Right, but there's a reason for that. That whether it was on guns or on abortion, a lot of these policies don't have supermajority support in the legislature, which you need to have to pass anything after May 31st with an immediate effective date in the state. The clock resets on January 1, so perhaps the governor and his team and legislative leaders are counting their votes and seeing if they can get it done in the new session. Well, it'll be a little bit easier.
One thing that I have learned here is when you have enough votes, you do it. Why aren't they doing it? Because they don't have enough votes. I think it's just that basic.
Definitely a good rule to live by here in the Capitol. So, Brenden, Dave, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure, Cole.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.